All right.
So, Ben, what is your fascination with hip hop? I love your musings inspired by hip hop.
I started as a rapper. You guys are laughing. I did. So when I was, actually wrote about this, when I was 18, a friend of mine growing up got shot and he became blind. And I was very focused at the time on kind of basically cheering him up. You know, like when you get shot when you're a kid and you lose your sight, it's the worst thing in the world. And I was in New York, and so I would listen to, there was this DJ on the radio, Cool DJ Red Alert. And he had the most fantastic show. And at that time, like, you could only hear hip hop on Saturday night. Like literally only on Saturday night, only on Tuesday. There's Cool DJ Red Alert and DJ Chuck Chill Out. And I would record the tapes and I would send them to my friend. And he, you know, it was the only thing that like cheered him up was these like Red Alert and Chuck Chill Out tapes. And so he kind of got fired up about it. So that summer I went home, I was like, let's start a rap group. And we started this group, the Blind and Deaf Crew. And Def, D-E-F, like Def Jam. And Def was like the word then. And we had, you know, I wrote a lot of rhymes. They were simple. It was like the era of the, like Run DMC and the Beastie Boys. So you know the complicated rhyme schemes you got later with like Rakim and Nas. But it was like, the blind deaf crew, you know where fly. 3 of us, but we got 4 eyes. So anyway,
So
that was a long answer.
We're so glad.
That was my original career.
We're so glad that you discovered entrepreneurship. Thank you for.
I have skills. That's not fair.
So tell me about the early days when you just really early on in your career, you just jumped right into the entrepreneurial world. And I'm wondering, how many of you out there are seniors? Okay, so quite a few, right? So you're probably thinking about what are you going to do next, et cetera. What was your thought process as you decided what you were going to do and then how you ended up jumping into Netscape?
Well, actually, so out of school, I joined a company called Silicon Graphics, which, you know, at that time, it was kind of like the Google of today. It was where all, like, you know, all the, like, so many great engineers and whatnot went to work there. And it was just so exciting to be in a place that had that many smart people. And they were like, the people I worked with were like ridiculously good. I had this boss, Chris Wagner, and I used to call him Black Wagner because he killed bugs dead, like, you know, Black Flag, the roach killer. And he, like, we were working on like the operating system in those days, and we were trying to take, this is how old I am, we're trying to take the operating system that we had and we were putting it on the first multi-processor machine. So we had to deal with, you know, like things like put semaphores around the kernel and whatnot. And so my job was to basically write a bad program that caused the kernel to crash, which was easy because I was a bad programmer. And I would write the program and the kernel would crash. And when the kernel crashes in the operating system, right, you just have a dump of what was in memory. There's no, like, you're too low level. There are no tools really. It was just like a dump of hexadecimal numbers. And you know, I'm like, how is he going to find a bug out of that? So I just take Chris the dump, and he goes, oh, in that address, that's a pointer. It should be like, that should be like a value. It shouldn't be a pointer. Like, he had every address in the entire operating system memorized. He knew it was supposed to be in there. I was like, wow, that guy is good. So that was just exciting to be around like people that talented.
But you bring up a really good point that you were in QA, like you were working your way up. A lot of times, you know, it takes a while to get to the point where you can actually, you know, work your way up. But on the other hand, entrepreneurship is maybe a little bit of a different story. I mean, did that play into your thoughts of moving into a different scene?
Yeah, you know, so I didn't, you know, in those days, I didn't think of, like, starting a company would have been like an out-of-body experience for me. Like, I couldn't even, like, imagine that when I started working. And it wasn't till, years later I joined Netscape. So, when they had, the browser and Mosaic came out, which you are all too young to remember that.
This was like when the World Wide Web was just being invented.
Yeah, but it used to be there was no internet. Like when I was a boy, we wanted to look something up, we went to the library. We got out the microfiche.
Decimal system.
And the Dewey Decimal System, that was, Google was called the Dewey Decimal System, which is, and just to let you know how old that technology was, like they called it the Dewey Decimal System because like decimal was the hot technology, like not just integers, baby. We got decimals. Right, so,
that's when they started putting the @ sign in everything, right?
Yeah.
Like a little bit later than that.
Yeah, exactly. So when I saw Mosaic for the first time, it was really just mind-blowing for me because when I was at UCLA, the internet was around. I mean, Professor Kleinrock basically invented the internet, but the internet was different. It wasn't like what you're used to now. It was like literally you get the cable was yellow that you plugged into your computer. You had the computer. And then you would get on the phone, call somebody up and say, can I have an IP address? And they would tell you, write this down, 192.87.75.63. You would then take that, edit 2 files on your computer, put them in there, and then you'd kind of get the thing talking on the internet, but you would be talking like completely in text. And you had FTP, you had Gopher, and then you could email your 5 friends in the TA lab, and that was kind of the internet. And then so, you see like the World Wide Web, a browser, and it was just overwhelming. So I knew I had to join that company. And so once I joined Netscape, then I knew what a startup was. And then, years later, we're like, we with my other co-founders, we were all like, oh, we're going to start a company. And it's like, great, yeah, let's start it. I'm like, who's going to be CEO? And they all look at me like, you're going to be CEO. And I was like,
this was software.
Oh boy, yeah. That was LoudCloud. Yeah, that was a company.
So tell me a bit about the entrepreneurial world when you're actually running the business. What sticks out as one of the toughest times that you had to go through?
Well,
because your book, your book is hard things about hard things, right? So it's like
ain't nothing easy.
So what motivated the title of your book?
Yeah, so the motivation for the title was actually, so I was up in the middle of the night one night, sweating, cold and sweating. Like that's the weirdest feeling in the world when you're cold and you're sweating. It's like I thought I'm supposed to sweat when I'm hot. And I never experienced that till I was CEO, but I experienced a lot as CEO. And so I'm up and I'm going, why? I've read almost every business book out there. Like, why is nothing helping me? Like, how can I read this many books and not know how to like get the answer to any of my problems? And I was thinking, well, let's see, the Built to Last, they had this whole thing about you got to set a big, hairy, audacious goal. And I'm like, well, that's not the hard thing. The hard thing isn't setting the big goal. Like, that's easy. The hard thing is when you miss a goal and like there's like economic consequences to it and you have to lay people off. That's the hard thing. And I was like, and it's like,
oh. So tell us about one of those situations.
Yeah. There's so many of
them. Just one. Just pick one.
Well, I give you one example. So one of the easy things that venture capitalists tell me all the time was, and this is just a kind of simple example. They're like the key to building a great company, and they would all say the key to building a great company, Ben, is you have to hire A players. And I was like, oh, that's good to know, because I was planning to hire a bunch of idiots, and now I'm all straight. But, what you find out is you get out there, and then your company has a problem like mine did, and you're like the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and they're saying how you're like, your company is dead. We were called the IPO from hell. Like literally Business Week ran a whole story called the IPO from hell, which was my IPO. And so then you have to hire somebody, it's really hard to convince the A player to join your company at that point. Like that's a real challenge. So what you have to do is you're not going to get the A player that everybody else wants, that doesn't have, like, that nobody can see the flaws, the whatever. I don't know how the ratings on diamonds, but that diamond when you can't see the flaw. You need to hire the person who is great at the thing you need him to be great at, the thing you need her to be great at, and may have some real other issues. And like learning how to do that.
You mentioned culture. So what is the key to culture in an organization?
Well, culture is complex.
Yeah.
So, it was one of the things that I would say I understood least well when I started as a CEO. And, because it's kind of this amorphous thing. Like, what is culture? And there's culture in life, and then there's culture in a company. And, culture in a company is basically, it's like, how do people behave when you're not, like, looking? Like, what do they do left to their own devices? And so you have goals and objectives, and you've got one-on-ones, and you've got mission statements and all that. But that's not really what people do every day. Like, somebody calls you, do you call them back right away? That's really a cultural thing. That's not a goal or objective. Do you try and undermine your peer, or do you kind of try and learn from your peer? That's kind of a cultural thing. And so how do you, like, get a culture to be a certain way? And it's tricky and complicated. And I actually, it took me years to learn it. And the best book on it is this book, The Black Jacobins, which is about the Haitian Revolution. And it's a story of Toussaint Louverture and how he kind of led, there's only been one successful slave revolt in the history of humanity. So, like, if you think about, that's like an amazing thing in itself. So, like, the slaves of the Han Dynasty, like, never rose up. And in the Ottoman Empire, the Christians never rose up. And Nat Turner failed. And, like no slaves, like, ever successfully revolted except this one time in Haiti. And you go, well, like, why is that? And how do you do it? And it turns out that slave culture is really detrimental to having an army. And the reason is that there are all these things, it's very short-termist because you don't control your own life. So you can, get something today, but, like, it's not yours. So everything is very short-term oriented. Like, loyalty is systematically broken down because they, like, remove you from your family and all that kind of thing. You're not allowed to read. So, like, all that kind of stuff. So, like, how do you take that culture and turn it into an army? And so in that book, it goes through a lot of the things that he did to reprogram that culture. And, like, truly, like, remarkable thinking. Like, so, but that really translates into a company. So one of the things that I took is, like, you need shocking rules. Like, if you're going to change somebody's behavior, you have to put a rule down that they can't even believe you put down. And one of the rules that he put down is officers in my army cannot cheat on their wives. And you guys might think, oh, well, that's not that shocking. But, like, armies in Haiti at that time, they were all, like, rape and pillage. And, like, it was like, let's go. Like, they were wild. And so to say, like, okay, now you can't, not only can you not rape and pillage, but you can't even cheat on your wife. Like, everybody was like, well, why that rule? Like, why that rule? And the rule was because your word meant everything, like, which was a huge change from slave culture, right? Like, where, like, the word meant nothing. Your word is everything. And if you can't keep your word to your wife, you can't even be an officer in this army. And Toussaint, like, famously said, I would sooner give up my command than break my word. So, like, he was on that. And that was a huge basis for, look, you could trust what people said in that army. And that was almost impossible to do from that standpoint. So if you look at, okay, that's a long talk about Toussaint, Ben, like, what are you getting at? So if you look, we started Andreessen Horowitz. And one of the first things that I wanted to have in the culture was, look, when I was an entrepreneur, I felt disrespected by venture capitalists because I would show up to the meeting and they would make me wait 45 minutes. And I'm like, in those days, there was no Wi-Fi. So that's a long wait. And I had to work. And so I was like, look, we're not going to be late to meetings with entrepreneurs. So how am I going to do that? And I said, okay, I'm going to create a rule that's going to shock people. If you're late to a meeting with an entrepreneur at Andreessen Horowitz, $10 a minute. So you're late 5 minutes, $50. So the first time somebody pays that fine, they're like, why are you caught 5 minutes? I had to go to the bathroom. Like $50. And I'm like, because we respect what it means to build a company here. And so that's a rule that I took from Toussaint, essentially, that set the culture. And if you go in there now, like one of the things we're most known for is like we're on time for meetings. Like you go to any other venture capital firm, they're all late. You go to our firm, like we're on time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, yeah, as an entrepreneur, you understand what that means. So that's, that's one of the aspects of culture. Another aspect is, make decisions that demonstrate your priorities. And this is, another really, I'll keep using Toussaint because I know so much about him. So in the Haitian Revolution, one of the big things was, okay, once they won, or once, they kind of took control of the island, what do you do with the slave owners, the plantation owners? And the priority for Toussaint was he wanted Haiti to be a great nation at that point. And so what he did was, and he knew he needed the plantations to keep running because sugar was the whole thing for Haiti, it was the whole economy. And so he said, look, not only am I not going to kill you, but I'm going to let you run the plantations. You can no longer have slaves, but I'm going to lower your taxes so you can afford slaves. So that's a shocking decision, but it made the priority very, very, very clear on what he wanted to accomplish. And in business, you have to make decisions that demonstrate your priorities. And I'll give you an example. So a decision that people get wrong all the time is somebody comes and asks for a raise. And why do they get that wrong? Oh, you come ask me for a raise, and I like you. And I know you're going to feel great if I say yes. Okay, and I'm going to feel powerful. I gave you a raise. Ben, can I have a raise? Yes, you can have a raise. Wow, that's awesome. Z's got a raise. Then what happens next? Well, I'll say, Z, you got to keep this confidential. Don't tell anybody you've got a raise. And then, so what is Z going to do? She's not going to tell anybody, but she might go home. She might tell her spouse, hey, guess what? I got a raise. Because she has to. Because you know what else? If she doesn't tell her spouse, she doesn't tell him, then he's going to see the money in the bank account. And he's going to go, Z, what's going on? Are you Breaking Bad? Are you trapping? What's going on?
I'm rapping.
Where'd all this money come from? She's rapping. You got to have an explanation.
Throwing down some rhymes on the side.
Okay, and then you're at the office party, and then somebody else is friends with him, and he's like, how's it going? Oh, I'm doing great. Z just got a big raise. And then that person is like, oh, I didn't know we were giving out raises. And I'm way better than Z. What are you talking about? I should have got that raise. And so now you've created politics, you've created everybody in your organization is going to be going okay, I have a fiduciary responsibility in my family to ask my manager for a raise right now, and not only now, but every chance I can. And, as opposed to you make the decision that, look, no, we're going to have a actual review process where we evaluate everybody and we give people the biggest raise who are supposed to get the biggest raise based on the work they do, not because they politic me and have the courage to ask me this. And that's kind of, the kinds of things that set the culture. What kind? Do you want a culture of fairness? You want a culture of who's your buddy? Who's got the most charisma to go ask the boss? And that's a real thing. And most companies, by the way, the culture is who has the most charisma to ask the boss. And so you have to make decisions that demonstrate the priorities, or you're going to live like that. And so that's, a lot of, when you think about culture, you have to think about how do you get to that point? And the reason I bring up that book is that was the first time I was like, oh, that's how you do it. That's how you think about that.
And it sounds like what you're saying is culture and leadership are just incredibly intertwined. And the leadership is the making those difficult decisions. when it's not necessarily a popular thing to do.
Well, it's the thing, that's a great point in that as a leader, there's a set of decisions that you make where if you were to take a poll, everyone would go like, yes, I would make that decision too. That's not leadership. Those decisions, you make decisions like that. If everybody knows it's a good idea, great. No problem. And you agree it's a good idea. That's an easy decision, but it's not really leadership because the group would have done it without you. Leadership is when the group thinks one thing and you think something else and you're not sure, but you're pretty sure you know more than they do. And you have the courage to stand up and make that decision. That's very difficult to do. And you see that like super seldom in the world. Very little in politics. But it's critical in a company because that's kind of that's the whole value of the leader, is having the courage to make those very difficult decisions.
And that's probably during the times like year 2000, other times at tough times where there's the, I think we once said that you're like, there's different kinds of leaders. There's a sort of battle time.
Peacetime, wartime.
Peacetime, yeah.
Peacetime, wartime. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing. So I wrote this post, Peacetime, Wartime CEO, which I'm thinking of the rap quote that I had to start it, which is, I think, you're lucky that I ain't the president because I'd push the fucking button, get it over with, fuck all that waiting and procrastinating and all that goddamn negotiating. And that's kind of like a wartime CEO mentality. So, when I was a student, and I read a lot about management, and the thing about management books is there are certain things that are really consistent in almost every management book. You have to empower your people. You definitely can't berate anybody in public. You've got to delegate all these things, and those are like generally good rules. But then, in my youth, the CEOs that I really admired were Andy Grove and Steve Jobs. And, they berated a lot of people in public. And, and there were all kinds of stories about like Steve Jobs dropping down and like not delegating, but like making a decision on like, the shape of a font or like, something that minuscule. And you go like, well, why is he doing that? And Andy Grove, there's this really, it's actually a cultural story where somebody, he's got a meeting and somebody comes in late, I don't know how much late they were, but he looks at them in front of everybody and he says, all I have in this life is time and you're wasting it. Like, wow, that hurt my feelings, and I just read about it. And so like, what's that if this other thing is management? Like, why did he do that? Why did Steve Jobs do that? Like, why did it work? And it really gets into this peacetime, wartime concept. And there are times in a company when developing the people is the priority. And like taking the time to kind of enable everybody to learn on their own and develop their own judgment and so forth is the right thing to do. But there are times when the speed and quality of decision making is the thing. When you're fighting for your life, when you're weeks away from bankruptcy, when you've got, in Andy Grove's case, like the Japanese have cut the price on computer memory so much that you have to, lay off 80% of the company and move into microprocessors. Like you get into those kinds of situations, and there is a different set of techniques that nobody ever talks about, which are the wartime techniques. And in going back and saying, well, why didn't anybody talk about that? A lot of it comes from, so many of these books were written by management consultants talking about the most successful companies at the height of their power. They were in peacetime. But like when you're in wartime, like you end up doing some things differently from time to time. And, you end up using a mix of both. But I wanted to at least lay that out so people would know, like, there's a reason that Andy did it that way.
So true that we usually only hear the success stories. It's like, looking back and you only remember like presumably childbirth. I haven't had kids, but it's the only reason why this human race is still here is that we conveniently forget those tough times, right?
Exactly. Success bias, I think.
Success bias. We have a whole room full of, aspiring leaders, and there's a long path to get to that point. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about that path, finding that path. What are the do's? What are those tough times that you need to go through? Maybe some advice for the students as they're thinking about what they should study, and maybe as they graduate, what they might do as their first gig.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's a good trick.
It's a tricky. So look, one of the things I would just say right off the bat is, it's probably a mistake to try and figure out everything right now. You get into, the people who I knew who kind of over-engineered their future at this point tended not to have the most success because you just can't ever know enough to do it. So there's a lot to be said by kind of figuring out what you're good at and trying to just make a contribution anywhere in that field and getting to know people and getting to learn it, rather than trying to map the whole thing end to end. Like everybody who mapped the whole thing end to end when I was in college ended up being an investment banker. And they paid the most out of college, probably still pays the most out of college. But, there's a lot of misery in investment banking. And the biggest thing for me, so like one of the best lessons I learned in my life was, I think I was about 20 years old, and I had, in those days, like you went into college undeclared. I went as undeclared. And I took this computer science class, and I learned about Alan Turing, and I learned about kind of computability, and that he had proven that, like, if you had something that, like, you could run on a Turing machine, like, you couldn't build a more powerful, like you literally, like mathematically could not build a more powerful machine computationally. And this was, in like 1985. And so in 1985, we didn't have this idea of a general machine that could do everything. Like we had, like, there was this company, Wang, that made word processors, and then like you had like tape recorders, and you had like clock radios, and you had video cassette recorders, and like television sets, and like you had dedicated machines for everything, calculators. So nobody knew, even though Alan Turing had figured this out in the 40s, nobody knew that there was going to be like a universal machine that was going to do everything, like that you'd have that all in your pocket. Like nobody knew that. And like I like learned that in class. I was like, oh my God. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm majoring in computer science for sure. And I ran back to the dorm room to tell, like, my suite mates, my dorm mates, all in the same suite. And I'm like, guys, I'm going to major in computer science. There's this guy, Alan Turing, and he figured out this computability thing, and there's going to be one machine. And I'll never forget it. One of my roommates looked at me and said, "You're an idiot. Why would you major in computer science at Columbia University? You can go to DeVry and you can learn how to program computers, you can learn how to fix them, and you can learn how to build them. You're a moron." And right then I realized, I shouldn't listen to my friends. And that's probably been one of the keyest things, is you really have to think for yourself. And because like at this age, you're going, well, what is she doing? What is he doing? Like, oh, that sounds interesting. Okay. And that's fine to find out. But you really have to go, who am I? Like, what am I great at? Not what are they great at, or what do they want to do, or what is their uncle in business doing, or that kind of thing. You've got to go like, who am I? And think for yourself. So that's probably the number one piece of advice I would give.
Well, and things are changing so much too with automation and AI. And actually, my latest episode of my podcast, The Art of Manufacturing, we had somebody who has a complete Nick Pinkston. He has a factory that's 100% automated. So labor and the impact of the workforce is really changing too. And so a lot of people are worried about what does that mean for the future of jobs. And I wonder what that means for people that are still learning. They're still in school.
Sure.
What should I be learning to make sure I'm still relevant in 5 years when all the robots are going to be taking my job, right?
We are the robots. So, well, let me start with just kind of all the jobs are going away thing, because I think that I think it's a little overrated in some ways. So if you look at, we've been automating really since the Industrial Revolution. So if you think about that, and really since like the invention of the steam engine, like at a pretty aggressive pace as humanity. And, as late as, I think, 1780, like 90% of the country was working in agriculture. So if you think about that, like we automated away 90% or 87% of the jobs, because I think 3% of the population is working in agriculture today. We automated away 87% of the jobs, yet we had higher employment. And so there's an odd thing in automation, which is when computers were invented, we knew without a doubt that all the typesetter jobs were going away. Like that was very easy to predict. What was harder to predict was there were going to be millions of graphic design jobs. That job didn't exist. And so knowing the implication of new automation, new technology. I mean, I don't remember, but I remember reading about like when refrigeration came in, like how many people delivered ice? Like this huge number of people delivered ice. But that went away with like refrigeration. And
they shipped it around the world to India.
Yeah,
It was pretty crazy.
Ice shipping, ice delivery, like it's a whole ice supply chain. I mean, it's crazy. But so it is hard to predict. And there are so many people who love to write about the doom of the future. But like if you go back and read about the invention of the electric light, like, oh my God, the lamp-lighters, like they're all out of business. Like this is terrible. And like life is going to be horrible. Like it's going to be light all the time. Nobody ever sleeps, on and on and on. So like anytime there's technological advance, people get way overly worried. And, and this time is different because this time the automation, but, we'll see.
You would, I would think, acknowledge, though, that the pace of change keeps accelerating.
So that is the really, I think, important thing is the pace of change is accelerating. So how you educate yourself has to change and accelerate. And so, the tools about what you learn, so it used to be like a reasonable proposition to graduate from college and start learning and stop learning stuff. Like that's a ridiculous idea now. And, it wasn't good for people. It just meant you could get more drunk. Because, you can just get drunk all day long. You never have to read a book. And if you watch Mad Men, that's exactly what they did. But like in the future world, you're going to have to be more, people are going to have to be more adaptable because, kind of things are going to change much more quickly than they had in the past. But the good side of that is it's easier to learn something now than it ever was. It used to be really hard. You used to have to go to college to learn something. Now, I mean, there's Khan Academy and Udacity and like everything online and Wikipedia and Google, and it's incredible. So anything you want to learn, you can learn. And so that's probably the main skill you need to adopt to the modern world. But if you're an engineer, like this is just such a great time to be an engineer in that, that's who everybody wants to hire. So don't stress about it. I mean, my main thing would be just don't stress about it. Figure out what you really like doing and try and go after that, or what you're really good at. I mean, I think where you can go, I've really got this good skill. Or if you have, you're like an okay engineer and you're like really good at talking to people, then like that's a combination of skills that's very powerful. So like if you can put skills together, that's also a big thing. Like it's really hard to be LeBron James. That's really hard. Like you have to be the best basketball player in the world. Like that's super tough. It's a lot easier to be me Like I was like pretty good at engineering, like I'm pretty good at talking to people, I'm okay at telling stories, like put all that together.
And
I'm
being
a
humble
decent
too.
rapper.
You're so
And like, but there are very
You're
few
better than
people. There are
that.
very few people who are like decent engineers, okay rappers, pretty good at telling stories. Like you put that all together, and I'm
you are
unique.
LeBron James of venture capital. Come on.
Well,
Admit that. But anyway,
you see how that
you're
goes.
humble.
Like you don't have to be so good at one certain topic.
So what do you say? What are you seeing as the most exciting tech trends? The things that are really shifting. That you're not just investing in now, but that you think in 5 years is going to be really changing.
Yeah, well, when I was at UCLA, it's funny. I was studying AI, and I remember we had this course, neurocomputing, where we learned about the perceptron algorithm, and it was always, it was great. We could build these little perceptrons, and we could recognize the letters Q and P, but nothing else. And so it didn't seem to have much promise then. But there were some and you have to give the perceptron credit, because the modern kind of deep learning is really not that different. There are some really nice advances like backpropagation and so forth, but computing's advanced, like the amount of data we have, the amount of nodes that we can process it with have enabled us to basically classify much, much larger landscapes. And as a result, what we're able to do with AI is incredible now, and there's the kind of famous, now we can recognize cats better than humans. Google Translate can translate certainly any European language one to another really well, which translation was just impossible before. And we can drive cars, and I think that there's very few things that you won't be able to build a machine that can learn the algorithm for it, as opposed to having to write the algorithm. And so AI is a really exciting field. Another really exciting field, which I think when people ask me, what would you be if you were coming out of school today, I think I'd be a biohacker. Because we're at the point now where you can not only read biology, from a computer science standpoint, you can read, we've sequenced the genome, we can sequence the microbiome, the epigenome. So you can read biology, and now with CRISPR, you can actually write biology. So the things that are possible are super exciting. And then, we've seen lately people are applying real computer science techniques to biology, and the kinds of opportunities there. We'll probably cure more diseases in the next 20 years than we have in the last 1,000.
And you bring up a really good point by saying computer science and biology is there's these opportunities to span those boundaries and do the interdisciplinary thing that I think might not have been the case a while ago.
Oh, no question. I mean, so, I'll give you an example. We're invested in a company called Freenome, which uses kind of machine learning against biology to diagnose cancer. And why is this important? Well, it turns out that almost every form of cancer has been cured if you catch it early enough. So if you catch it in the early stages, it's no problem. Treat it, you're fine. But nobody ever catches it in the early stages. You always end up catching it rather late. And the reason is, to really catch cancer, you have to do a biopsy. And biopsies are very inconvenient and dangerous. You can die from one. So you're not going to do it till you get a lump, and then you're in trouble. And so what Freenome's been able to do is, by using kind of machine learning, and sequencing through a blood test, diagnose cancer in very early stages. So now you go in for your regular blood test. How's my cholesterol? Do I have cancer? That kind of thing. And, so that's just amazing. And it's something that, as a computer scientist or, a biologist, you can start to solve these, problems that have been intractable for hundreds of years.
We're going to open up for questions, and I'll ask one more question. But while we do that, anybody who has a question, come on up to the microphones up at the front, and we'll have about 15 minutes of that. So please don't be shy. Come on up. So I'm wondering, as somebody, a young person thinking about their career, would you recommend, do you have a particular suggestion for big company or startup when you first get out, or start your own company?
Well, it depends, a lot what you want to do. If you want to kind of, like, let's say you're an engineer and what you really want to do is, look, I want to learn how to work, kind of on really big software projects and kind of, understand my skill set and like understand how they use data to define things and this and that and the other. Then like a place like Facebook is unbeatable. Like they're so good at that, and you get a like incredible skill set working there. On the other hand, if what you want to learn how to do is kind of find how to fit a product to a market, then that's really done much more directly at a very early stage company often, and with the idea that you're going to go start a company one day, then that might be the way to learn that skill. And then, like the other thing though is if you want to, like going to a bad startup is kind of miserable. Like I'd actually rather be the janitor at Facebook than CEO of a bad startup. I'll just be honest with you. So, the other nice thing about a larger environment is you might meet a lot of people who might be interesting people to start a company with. So that's another kind of lens through which to see it.
Great. Okay. So if you can keep your questions brief. Over here.
Hello. Thank you, Ben, for being here.
Yes.
I'm actually going into investment banking after graduation, so I'll be going through some misery.
Well, it starts out with misery, but everybody values the work ethic that you will have.
So my question is, so you were a tech entrepreneur and you moved into VC field in 2009. So
yeah.
What motivated you to make the change, and how has the experience been different compared to just being an entrepreneur? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's definitely totally different. So I'll tell the story. I actually met with some students earlier and told the same story, but I will tell it again because it's a good story. So when I built, my company, LoudCloud, which started out as the kind of an original 1999 cloud computing company, and then I had to transform it into Opsware because it was too early to do that company, and we went through like very high highs, very low lows. I had to do all kind of take it public when it was 18 months old and so forth, and I didn't know how to do any of it. Being a technical founder, like there were so many CEO skills that I didn't have. But at the end of it, and I never felt like I was a good CEO the whole time I was doing it, at the end of it, I got a call from a private equity firm. And private equity is different than venture capital in that they're the kind of guys who do buyouts and turnarounds and that kind of thing. And they said, Ben, we want you to join our firm. And I was like, you haven't even met me. Like, why do you want me to join your firm? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And they said, well, we think that LoudCloud to Opsware was the greatest tech turnaround in the last 20 years, and we need that turnaround skill. I said, okay, you are aware that I'm the one who screwed it up in the first place. So I was just fixing my own mistake. It's not like I can fix somebody else's company. And that really got me thinking, well, why was I able to fix it? And it was because I knew all the assumptions that we had made that turned out to be incorrect. And I think if you're coming into somebody else's company, that'd be hard to do. Yet, every venture capital firm kind of specialized in replacing the technical founder with a professional CEO. And I thought there ought to be at least one firm that helps a technical founder become a CEO. And that was the idea behind Andreessen Horowitz. And then, it's just a completely, utterly different thing. I'll tell you the biggest difference is as CEO, you kind of like your output is the speed and quality of decisions. And speed is actually more important than quality in a lot of ways because you have to keep it moving. You've got to keep the company going. Because if you wait on a decision, everybody who works for you is waiting. And that's CEO rhythm. Investor rhythm is the opposite. Quality is everything. You can take all year to make a decision, but you make the right one and you're set. So that's probably the number one difference. Good question.
So in regards to your question about being a biohacker, so it seems that the venture capital landscape for biotechnology is not necessarily purely analogous to other segments in the technology sector, in that perhaps exit strategies and whatnot are kind of, people have different motivations. So what advice would you give to the next wave of biotechnology entrepreneurs?
Well, we just started a biofund for exactly that reason, this advertisement. So I think you're right. So historically, biotechnology venture capital has all been around therapeutics, i.e. drugs, as opposed to diagnostics or kind of things that are further away from the regulatory vortex. A couple of things are changing. One is, with computational biology, there are very interesting opportunities around diagnostics where you can build a company in a way that's more similar to the way you build a computer science company. That's a lot of what we're funding. And so I think that it's going to become more like computer science for sure over the next 5-10 years.
Great insight. Thank you.
Right here.
Okay.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. Great talk. I'm Titus. I'm in the early stages of an AI startup, and I was just wondering, from an investor standpoint, what is it that you look for when an AI startup pitches to you? There's a lot of startups out there that claim AI, and a lot of them are just full of it. So how do you kind of distinguish that, or what does it even mean to you as an investor? The ones that are
Yeah, we've got AI. Well, I get more people sending me emails saying they've got AI. Well, that's a tip-off right there. AI is pretty broad field these days, yeah. So look, the first thing is if you look at a field like deep learning, an amazing thing's happened for the world, which is it's almost all been open sourced. So everything out of academia is going into open source, and then everything out of Google is being open sourced, and Facebook and so forth. So it's really hard to do a proprietary breakthrough okay, I've got something that's whatever, better than CNN's or better than what's going on, and that's a proprietary company, because you would have to beat the massive momentum that's going on over there. So that's challenging. I think, though, that applying that to a specific domain and so forth, particularly if you've got some really smart or clever idea about how you do that and so forth, are more interesting. And with AI, you have to have a theory on how you're going to get to a data advantage generally, because that's a big part of it. How how you bootstrap it, and then how it scales as you get bigger, and how in particular, there's certain areas where it's just really hard to compete with Amazon or Google or Facebook, because they are so large and they have so many computers and they have access to so much data. But there are a lot of areas where you can, and so kind of those kinds of things. It's a really great question. To go all the way into it would take me probably hours and hours, so I'm going to stop, but thank you very much.
Although we'll have some time afterwards a little bit too. So, okay, over here.
Hi, Ben. Great talk. So I'm a first-year computational and systems biology major who's considering transferring to computer science and doing perhaps tech breadth in bioengineering or a minor in bioinformatics.
Yeah.
What advice would you give for in what position could I have the most potential to leverage these fields in the future?
Well, look, I think any of those are good choices. So I would do the one that you're kind of most interested in, or go the way you're most interested in. I think having those two skill sets makes you you will have no problem getting started in the industry, just because there are very few people who have both vocabularies, and the kind of opportunities in it are so big. So I don't think you can make a mistake.
Thank you.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for your words. A more theoretical question. You mentioned that, there's the distinction between being a wartime leader or wartime CEO, and sort of those skills are different versus, say, peacetime. So somebody talks about them. What would you say, the main ones? How do you lead, and when things are difficult?
Well, the big thing is a lot of it gets down to the level of precision and the level of urgency and the level of inspection. So there's always, like in management, in any management, there's expect what you inspect, right? Like that's just kind of basic. You have to, you can't just delegate everything. You do have to look at it from time to time, or you will not get what you think you're getting. But when you get to, and it's hard to even, because a lot of it is a feeling, like, but, you know, there are times, like, you know, we had a time at Opsware where all of the customer, we had this huge set of requirements from customers. But virtualization had just come out. And I had spent
Describe
time,
to everybody.
So virtualization being the, you know, it's the technology where you take a computer and you cut it up into lots of virtual machines. So that was new in like, you know, 2003. And there was a product from a company called VMware, you know, and I knew Diane Green, who was running it. And so I tried the product and I was like, this product is transformational. We've got to basically integrate it and take into account that like a lot of people are going to be deploying this. None of our customers knew about it, were asking for it. But I knew we had to do it or we'd be late. And the team just was not going to get to it on their own. And so I said, look, I don't care what the customers say. You can't always do what you know. Sometimes you have to do what you think, or you're never going to get to the future. We're going to build virtualization. It's the number one priority. And go do it. Like that's a very wartime motion, as opposed to, well, I'm going to let the team decide. They're going to learn on their own. Andy Grove had a great comment on this. He said, you know, people say like, you know, I'm not going to train them because like they have to learn on their own. They have to, and Andy Grove says at whose expense? At the customer's expense? They're going to learn on their own? Like, no, you have to train them. And so that's a form of training. So
Thank you.
yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
I love your talk. Thanks for the great words. So my question is in two parts. What are the key traits that A16Z looks for when you're making an investment? Is it the team, the idea, the CEO? Or what exactly are some key factors that you look?
Those are all important.
Yes, right?
And the second part is, what's your advice to startups or to founders who are going to be pitching their company to you?
Yes. Okay. So on the first question, look, all of those things are important. You know, the quality of the team, is the idea a breakthrough is the real thing. Particularly the younger you are, the more important that you have a real breakthrough idea. Like if two young people just like start a company with a good but obvious idea, I would never invest in that because like I'd rather invest in like the experienced people with the same good and obvious idea. So if you're young, you've got to have like an idea that everybody else thinks is stupid, that really is such a breakthrough, nobody else can even see it. And so like the idea becomes more important. But you know, coming from a good engineering environment like UCLA helps and this and that and the other. You know, in terms of advice on pitching us, a lot of it is what do you know that nobody else knows? Like, what is it that you know that other people don't, that enables you to build a company that's going to be very valuable? And how did you learn it? And like, why is it important? Like, those are the things that really matter at the initial stage. You know, more so than, you know, a lot of people get trained on, oh, we've been increasing our users 20% week over week. We now have 8. You know, like, I don't care. Like, so it's much more like, is it really a breakthrough? And, you know, do you have the courage to turn that breakthrough into a meaningful company? That's essentially what I'm looking for.
Cool, thanks.
Okay.
Over here.
Hi, Ben. My name's Rohan. Quick question. Earlier in the talk, you said to focus on things that you're good at and keep going with that. I'm curious about what you think you're good at and how you discovered that.
I just went through that. I'm good at rapping. I'm good at knowing about rap. I'm like a rap historian. I can tell you all kinds of stuff. Look, I think I am good at understanding people and then understanding how kind of organizations and systems of people work. And then when you do something kind of as a leader, like what that means systemically. And, you know, a lot of it is being able to think about when you're talking to somebody, it's not the person you're talking to, it's the people who aren't in the room that you're representing as the leader. And thinking about how everybody's going to feel about what that conversation is turns out to be more complicated than most people know. And knowing how to do that has got great value for people building companies. So I think that's what I'm actually good at. I am a mediocre computer scientist as well. But I was good at certain things. I had some clever programs, but I don't think I was ever like at the level that the really great engineers that I've worked with over the years were.
Well, a lot of the writings that you've had really show a deep empathy for people and how they operate and how groups operate, and being able to communicate that as well, which is unique, I think.
Yeah, and it's a real kind of like disservice that I think the kind of mainstream movie making did about kind of leadership in companies, is they paint everybody as like a greedy murderer who runs a company, right? Like at the end of the whole thing, the guy at the top who's backing the drug dealer is always the CEO, right? But the truth of it is that the only way people want to work for you is if they believe that you have their interest, really have their interest at heart. And so it's hard to actually get to that position if you're that type, if you're like a really, truly bad person. Like, I don't know. I mean, there are people who are so brilliant they can be the criminal CEO, but that's really the exception in my experience.
One more question over here.
Hi, I'm a chemical engineering major, and one of the paths I was interested in was entrepreneurship in the alternative energy field. And I was sort of wondering, what was your perspective and what you thought the future of clean tech was from a venture capitalist perspective?
Yeah, so venture capital, so that's a tricky one because venture capital lost a lot of money in clean tech. And it really, the big mistake that the clean tech, there were two big mistakes by the clean tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists of the last era. One was there was a lot of investment in fuels, alternative fuels to oil. And the challenge with that is, only one was going to work, and then distribution was going to be incredibly hard. Because like just think gas stations, like, right, it's hard. And then the second was oil turns out to be really dynamic in how it can price itself over a short period of time to wipe you out of business if you're an alternative source. And so those two things, you know, that was really bad. The other thing that mistake that was made, that there was a huge bet on the regulatory policy regime to bail out the companies, and things like cap and trade didn't pass. And so that led to waste, you know, a huge amount of money. I think that, you know, I think you need to not make those mistakes. But there's been a lot of promise. I mean, battery technology is probably the most exciting thing going on. And if I were to say, okay, why am I confident that we're not going to melt the earth? Probably the biggest thing is, you know, if we could just have batteries like in power grids and not run them at peak capacity, that's like a 20x energy savings and, you know, kind of emission savings. You know, just on that alone, and you could see things, you know, far beyond that. So that's one thing. There's actually, we see pitches on nuclear fusion all the time, which always go, it's nuclear fusion. Do you have it working? They're like, almost. So like, if you got that working, that would be a hell of a thing. But yeah, so I'd just be like aware of the potholes that came before you. But yeah, it's certainly an important thing to work on, for sure.
Okay, thank you so much.
I so wish that I could let everyone else ask a question, but I'm getting hand waves that we have to stop. But we will have some time in the back to have a little bit more chatting. And it's such a pleasure. You're such a legend. It's just amazing to get your perspectives in real life. And thank you for everything that you do for the entrepreneurial community with your musings and your book. And what I'm hearing is, it's like, care for your people, think for yourself, don't be afraid to make those tough decisions, right?
Yeah, good summary. Excellent.
So thank you for imparting your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Okay.